people were expecting or possibly thinking about a change with the Vegas Falcons pretty much from the moment that they were announced. The idea that this was an all Saudi Arabia roster, that none of these players had really proven themselves in not only the Call of Duty League, but not even really North American Call of Duty. And obviously, that's a big thing for them to just come in and try to compete at the highest level. And they haven't had a lot of success doing so. They're 0-4 in the 2025 CDL season so far. We have talked a lot about them and how competitive or not competitive they have been. And we've pretty much come to the conclusion that they are, a bad team if you're just looking at their relation to the rest of the league. But it hasn't seemed like a complete disaster where they're getting 100-point clubbed. So that's a win. But I would say that this roster change is probably a loss, and it is probably no fault of their own. But this earlier this week, it was announced that Khhx will be stepping down from the roster and returning to Saudi Arabia to deal with personal issues. So first and foremost, best wishes to Khhx and everything with that. Hope things go well and he can come back to the CDL as quickly as possible. But as just far as the actual gameplay and the effect on the Vegas Falcons, this will have a pretty big effect, I would imagine. He was, by all accounts, the best player on the team. He seemed like the most promising prospect on the Vegas Falcons. And he is now gone, at least for the time being. Maybe he will come back at some point. But he will be replaced, reportedly, by an academy team player. So the Vegas Falcons has a few players on their academy team. It seems like that will be the direction they go in replacing Khhx for the time being. So let's just start there. Your first thoughts on Khhx, leaving the Vegas Falcons and going back to Saudi Arabia, and the impact it might have on Vegas.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like you said, wishing him the best with everything he's got to deal with, and I do think, like most people in the community, the common reaction that I've been seeing at least is that he was one of the better players, at least statistically, and when you're watching the games, just felt like he was performing pretty well individually. So obviously, anything that could potentially derail his development in terms of trying to get up to speed with um, the pro game and competing in NA, all that stuff. That obviously sucks, but hopefully, whatever's going on with him, he gets it resolved. He gets back in action soon, and then we get to see how things go from there. But yeah, I think that's like my overall takeaway for just if anybody was making a move on the Vegas roster is just you're coming over with this all Saudi team that's already at a disadvantage just in terms of having a lack of experience competing against the best of the best in North America. And once you play a couple matches with that team, like I've pointed out across multiple episodes now, there were definitely some moments where it was like, okay, these guys can shoot straight. They get some good direction from Clayster and crew on the coaching side of things. Like maybe they'll be able to figure some stuff out once they start playing some more. So then to have a roster change be like thrown into the mix there and possibly have to just switch up any roles or chemistry and all that stuff that can affect the makeup and construction of a team. That this can hurt Vegas, but also it gives someone else an opportunity to jump in and potentially prove that they're worthy of uh, competing at this level. And I'm not going to sit here, and I don't think you are, and pretend we know anything about the academy team on Falcons and who could potentially come in and replace Khhx. So we'll have to we'll cross that bridge when we get there, and once that individual starts playing, we'll see how things go from there. But yeah, that's just the immediate reaction, especially when it's somebody who's been playing pretty well and a team that's like just looking to gain that experience and stuff. It it sucks, but hopefully, whatever personal issues are going on for him and stuff, he gets resolved, and we'll see him back competing soon. Um, I do, uh, I Oh, I was looking at the roster on the CDL website, and don't know if it's because he's a coach or what, but Clayster is listed on the roster if you go to the CDL website. I feel like that would be what a lot of people would want to see from a CDL perspective, just fandom. I don't know how well that would go, obviously, though. I think it would be very beneficial for the three players playing alongside Clayster because he would just basically be like doing the coaching while playing. And I think it wouldn't be great for Clayster statistically, and it would lead to a bunch of losses, I feel like. So I don't think it's something that they'll do, but I do think, if they didn't have the academy team and Clay was listed as a sub and they had to throw him in, that would be kind of interesting. But doesn't sound like they're going to go down that route. Oh, I remembered what I was going to say now. The other part of this, I think it was Jacob Hale who tweeted that there are rumors going on around King of Body potentially being uh, replaced as well in the roster. So the official announcement um, from Vegas only mentioned Khhx. And then it said, we're using this opportunity to integrate players from our academy team to ensure we stay competitive while focusing on the long term success of the project. So we're not going to know right off the bat here who's coming in, if there is potentially more than one player joining, and potentially King of Body like being replaced as well as Khhx. So bunch of moving parts here. I do think that one tidbit there too is like the long term. What was the exact phrase? Long term success of the project. I think that's like important to point out too, because that's been part of the narrative that I have been mentioning. And obviously, I feel like other people are thinking it, if not saying it as well, as like um, if this Falcons Saudi roster fails this year, does Falcons just completely scrap the all Saudi identity and try and throw the bag at some players and make a super team with NA talent? Um, Obviously, that's a very small snippet of the announcement there, but saying like the long term success of the project, and having the academy team and now using the academy team to an extent to figure out how to uh, make a roster change, it makes me believe that the Falcons is going to stick with the all Saudi roster construction for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and to kind of deal with your last point first, that's exactly what they did in Counter Strike. They signed a bunch of really high profile
Yeah,
players. They didn't have a Saudi team. I believe Simple was on loan to Falcons at some point. From Navi. So like if we're going off of that same logic, maybe at some point that will happen where they're like, well, screw it, like we want to be competitive with Optic, we want to be competitive with LAT, and we have the money to do so, so we're going to actually use it and try to go after some of these big players. We'll see if that is the case. It does seem like that will be more of an off-season play than this season, obviously, because of all the players that are already under contract. But I think it's an interesting thought. Just to kind of finish up on the Saudi point, Luti, who's the coach of Falcons, and he's been with these guys for a few years now. At this point, he responded to Benji Nissim's tweet talking about like what the Falcons have to do for Challengers Elite if they're to qualify for season one, because then they would, if they're bringing someone up from the academy roster, they would obviously need someone else to fill that void. And Luti said, we've tried to make a plan which puts both of our teams in the best possible position going into Major 1 and Elite 1, and we'll use the scrims, online games, and the Elite to work out our best options going into the first Major. We've also brought Hamza Frosty, which some people might know as Glow Frosty or Hamza, into play with our academy team. Now that we only have 7 players, Elite 1 ends January 23rd, so we have a number of scrims and another online game before Major 1 to rotate should we need to. I wasn't aware of the rulings regarding changes throughout the Elite, but I want to try and give all players a fair opportunity without abusing this ruling. The timing with the holiday break was not ideal, but we have done what's best for both teams and look forward to introducing some new talent to the CDL. So from what he is saying, and I don't think any of us really thought that Clayster was going to come in. Like maybe he would be like a very, very last minute thing. Like if maybe like there weren't players in America when all this happened. Like, but it
Sure.
seems that they have players stateside that can come in and slot into the roster for the foreseeable future. And they would just kind of need to fill in on the back end with their challengers team or their academy team to kind of make sure that everything is all right there. So like you said, we have absolutely no idea about these academy players. We didn't have any idea about the CDL players, so there's no way we would have known about the guys behind them. I know that the four players that are signed or are on the roster, I don't even know how to say some of these names, like D7 Umex. I would just say Dumex. Then there's
Yeah, yeah.
King, QK4B, and WXSL. Those are the four players that are signed to the academy team. Which of those would come up is anybody's guess. I'm sure there are people that would know more about the Vegas academy team than either one of us, but we certainly don't know anything right now. But I think that's interesting. I'm in support of it. I believe that if you're not going to be able to be competitive at the top of the CDL, it is about building a roster that fans can be attached to. And sure, like I'm not saying that a ton of American fans are necessarily going to latch on to the Vegas Falcons because of this roster, but I'm sure there's a lot of fans like in the Middle East that would really like to see this team, and maybe even going over to Europe. And like there might be just fans in general that want to see something different and not just a bunch of retreads that have been in the CDL and out of the CDL. That this was the old Paris Legion thing that we've talked about before. So I'm in support of it, and to see new talent come in, maybe there could be another another great player. Obviously, Khhx showed a lot of talent, a lot of potential. Maybe there is somebody on the academy team that can do something similar, but I think we'll just have to wait and see on that.
I think on the fandom note you just made there too. I mean, obviously, you mentioned Paris Legion, and they were not the most popular team in the league, except for when Clayster was on the team for that one year. They gained some popularity just due to the Clayster effect, but um, it did remind me of, I believe it would have been in Vanguard, me like one of the early on majors, or maybe it was like major 2 or something like that, where they literally won. It was either it had to have been their first match on LAN or their first match, because I believe that Vanguard year was the year they only won 2 games. So I don't really remember the exact specifics of it, but I just remember it happening on stage, and like a lot of people got behind them because of that component to the narrative, right? I'm pretty sure it was against Seattle Surge back then. Um, could totally be off on that, but I feel like I remember that being the matchup. And I just remember like the crowd was electric at the LAN. Like they did a interview after the match, and fans were going nuts, right? So like I feel like that, like saying, yeah, there's probably not going to be a ton of people just casually supporting the Vegas Falcons, but I feel like once we get on LAN, and if Vegas has that potential to get that first win, like the crowd is going to gravitate towards them unless it's against Optic. Like if it's against basically anybody else, and Falcons are up like 2-anything, like yeah, imagine a game 5, like they start winning some rounds in the S&D, like the crowd is just going to be going nuts and trying to get behind them for that first win. So I know what you're getting at, and I don't think I'm totally contradicting it, but I do think just that narrative there, especially behind this project, and the whole messaging and everything going into it now with the all Saudi roster construction, like they're we've mentioned it now. They're inevitably going to win a match. It's just a question of when. And I think some fans will get behind the team in the build up to that, especially if it happens on LAN.
Yeah, there's a definitely a component of like lovable losers and people that they just want to see an upset, and obviously whoever they beat, it's a massive upset. It's something that you're not really expecting to see at that given point in time. So I think that's a really interesting point. Um, but yeah, I just think it's they're doing something different, and I'm okay with different because I would say that some of the teams, a lot of the teams in the CDL have tried to do pretty much the same thing year over year, and it hasn't worked out. And I'm okay with another team saying, we're not going to do that. We're not going to bring in the guys that are like the fringe CDL players that, some years they're in the Call of Duty League, some years they're in Challengers. We're not going to do that. We're going to go with guys that we think we can grow the esport or grow competitive Call of Duty in another place, and I'm completely fine with that. Especially if we have this thing going on with LAG or LA Gorillas, mate, and they are extremely popular in France. Even though they don't have any, they have one French player, I believe he's French, and but it's mostly just because Gotaga is pushing them because it's his team, and like that is a good thing for the CDL. Like I think, you look back a few years ago when we had the London tournament, and it's the only non NA tournament in CDL history. People absolutely adored the London Royal Ravens. Like they were kings essentially to those people in England. And if we could get some of that, the regionality, the just like people around the world kind of attaching themselves to CDL teams, I think that would be beneficial because we used to have that. We used to have when we would go to Esports World Cup and a team would play Vitality in France. That's a like even if it was Optic, like that team they're in trouble. Like the fans turn against them. Or obviously the only German team that I can really remember off the top of my head is Killerfish from like Black Ops 2 or something like that. Or you go to Australia and you're playing Mindfreak or Tainted Minds. Like there's something along those lines. And we really have lost a bit of that because all of the teams in the CDL are located in North America. Um, all of the players in the CDL are now located in North America, and that wasn't always the case. So just having this different component with the Vegas Falcons is good. But we're not expecting them to be necessarily competitive with Khhx or without Khhx. But I'm interested to see if what a new player can do or what a new player would look like in this scenario.
Yep.
Anything else on the Vegas Falcons before we move on?
I just wanted to bring up real quick. I went back in the notes and found where we did our preseason predictions, and obviously we both got it wrong the first time around in terms of which team would be the first to make a change. But if you don't count the optic move, which none of us foresaw, I had said Miami would be the first team to make a change, and you said Toronto. And I just thought it was funny that you said Toronto, and that's not looking too good right now. But we're both wrong either way, either if you count the hook move or not now, because Vegas did make a move. And I remember talking about that when we were doing that, saying, like, I don't think Vegas is going to make a change because I think they're going to commit to this all Saudi roster, which I guess is right in a sense. But hey, stuff happens and they're making a change.
Yeah, I guess if we'll have to wait and see because obviously the first two roster changes of the season have been due to personal matters. So I want to see which team actually makes the change
Yeah.
based on
Okay.
results and performance. Like, granted, we're
I
still
like that.
wrong,
I like that. Yeah.
but I just obviously it will happen probably after Major One. I think that'll be the time that these teams will actually make the change. And I'm not sure which of the teams will make it because we've tried to predict these things before, even like a few weeks out, and you just never really know what the coaches and the players are thinking at that point in time and whether they believe that they can kind of fix it with this current roster. But we have about a month or so until that point comes, but I do see a few roster changes coming in the CDL at that point.